There are letters written in love. There are letters written in sorrow. And then there is this one, a letter that, according to witnesses, came from the other side of death. It was found among the belongings of a nun in Germany in the 1950s. And its message was so dark, so disturbingly real, that the local bishop granted permission to publish it, calling it highly instructive for souls. Inside those pages was the voice of a woman who had died suddenly, a woman who claimed to write from hell itself. Her name was Annie, and what she revealed in that letter would shake even the most skeptical heart. Before we begin, if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, subscribe to the Stigmata channel. Here we tell the true accounts, the miracles, and the mysteries that point beyond this world. Now, listen carefully, because once you've heard this letter, you will never think of eternity the same way again. During the mid-20th century, in a quiet convent in Germany, a nun passed away. Among her belongings, the sisters found an old, yellowed letter, written in a trembling hand. It had no signature, but its contents were so terrifying, so detailed, that the church itself later approved its publication as highly instructive. The document would soon become known as the Letter from Beyond. The nun who discovered it explained that it came to her through a dream. In the dream, she saw her old friend, a woman named Annie, who had died some years earlier in a car accident. Annie appeared before her, pale and tormented, and handed her a bundle of pages. When the nun awoke, the pages were there beside her bed, exactly as she had seen them in the dream. The letter began with a single, dreadful sentence. "Clara, do not pray for me. I am condemned." From there, the letter unfolds like a testimony from the depths of eternity, the confession of a soul forever separated from God. Annie explains that she and Clara had once worked together in the same office. They had been friendly, though not deeply close. When Annie later married, they lost contact. She died suddenly in a car accident in 1937. Clara, upon hearing the news, was filled with sorrow. She attended Mass and offered Holy Communion for the repose of her friend's soul. But that night, she could not sleep. She heard noises at her door. The next morning, in her dream, she found the letter, written in Annie's unmistakable handwriting. And this is what it said. "Clara, do not pray for me. I am lost forever. If I tell you this and reveal to you details of my damnation, it is not out of friendship. Here we love no one. I do it only as part of that power which always wills evil and yet produces good. I wish you were here with me, for here everyone thinks the same way. Our will is frozen in hatred, hatred for all, and above all, hatred for God." Annie then begins to describe her life on earth. Her parents, she says, had once been Catholic, but gradually abandoned the church. Her childhood was ordinary, no great crimes, no scandals. But there was no prayer, no Mass, no confession. Religion was something distant and almost ridiculous. She writes, "My parents met at a dance. They married out of obligation. At their wedding, a few drops of holy water were all that remained of their faith. I never truly learned to pray. Words like grace, Mass, and church disgust me even to write now. We, the damned, hate everything that exists. We even envy nothingness because we cannot cease to be." She describes the horror of existence after death, a state without sleep, without rest, without hope. "We do not eat, we do not walk, we do not rest. We are chained in spirit, forced to see every grace we once rejected. Every memory burns like fire. We drink hatred as if it were water. Annie goes on to speak about her hatred for God, not ignorance, but deliberate rebellion. The blessed in heaven must love him, because they see him in his beauty. The souls on earth may love him freely, for they see only his reflection. But we, who have seen him as judge and rejected him, hate him forever. We cannot and will not change. Even when she tries to lie, she says she cannot. She writes, "I am forced to tell the truth, even against my will. I must swallow back the insults I wish to hurl. God is merciful, even to us, for he does not let us come closer to him. If he did, his nearness would be unbearable fire." Annie recalls her childhood, a father who drank heavily, a mother who worked endlessly, and a home without prayer. She remembers her first communion, which she took lightly, more as a formality than an act of faith. "My father only told me to make sure my dress was beautiful," she writes. "Nothing else mattered." She scoffs at the modern practice of giving communion to children at 7 years old, claiming that the devils work hard to prevent it. "It is better," she writes bitterly, "that a child sin mortally first, so that when she receives the white God, he cannot harm us so much." Annie explains how her life moved from indifference to cold rejection. She joined a girls' association, took part in outings and social events, but slowly withdrew from prayer. She says, "All those who burn here never prayed enough." Prayer is the first step toward God, the easiest and the most decisive. To those who pray, God gives light and strength, but I did not want his grace. She admits that she stopped praying years before her death. Her heart grew hard. "Here, there is no more grace," she writes. "Even if it were offered, we would spit it out in mockery." She recalls how, before her death, she created her own religion, a comfortable belief in reincarnation. She convinced herself that after death, the soul simply returned to earth in another body. That illusion removed fear and responsibility. "I made a God," she says, "who was far enough not to demand anything from me, and vague enough to change whenever I pleased." She replaced devotion with material pleasures, fashion, travel, social life. Her husband, she writes, thought like her. They lived for comfort and respectability, not for eternity. "Outwardly, we lived well," she says, "but inside, I was never happy. Something always gnawed at my soul." She mocks the idea of hell as a fable, flames, demons, and red light, and recalls how she once held a lit match under her friend's nose, joking, "See? That's how hell smells." Now, she writes, "Here, no one extinguishes the fire. The flames do not burn the body, but the soul itself, and they never go out. The fire of hell means fire, not a metaphor for remorse, but real fire." She explains the mystery of this torment. Our souls are bound to this fire. We cannot think or will as we choose. We know exactly that we will never see God. And that knowledge is torture. The more light a person received in life, she says, the greater the pain in hell. Catholics suffer most, she writes, because they were given more truth and despised it. Those who sinned out of malice suffer more than those who fell from weakness. But none suffers more than he deserves. Annie admits that she knew, before dying, exactly where she was heading. She had felt the final call of grace, one last invitation to repentance, and she refused. On the day of her death, she and her husband went for a drive. It was a beautiful summer morning. As they returned, a blinding light from an oncoming car made them lose control. The car crashed. In that instant, she cried out, not in prayer, but in fear. And then everything went dark. I awoke in light, she writes, a piercing light that revealed my entire life. I saw every grace I had rejected. It was like standing in a courtroom before the victim I had murdered, and realizing the victim was myself. But remorse, never. Shame, number. Only hatred. And then I fled, as Cain fled from Abel. That was my judgment. Then came the words, "Depart from me." And I fell into the eternal fire. Clara, the nun, finished reading the last trembling line. And as she did, the paper in her hands turned to ashes. At that same moment, the bells of the nearby church began to ring. The Angelus, the sound of prayer rising through the morning air. It was as if heaven itself was answering the voice of despair she had just heard. She fell to her knees and began to pray, and in that silence, she understood. Mercy is real, but only while we are still alive to seek it. That is the meaning of the letter from beyond. It's not simply a frightening story. It's a warning wrapped in mercy, because what Annie lost, we can still find. So how do we avoid her fate? How do we make sure our souls don't fall asleep the way hers did? It begins with prayer. Not just words, but meditative prayer. Every single day, find time to be alone with God. Set aside 30 minutes to meditate on the words of the gospel. For the first 15 minutes, try to memorize the passage, word by word. Let every sentence take root in your heart. Then, in the next 15 minutes, begin to ask questions. What is happening here? What is God saying to me through this moment? What truth is hidden behind each word? This kind of meditation transforms the soul, because it forces us to stop living on the surface and begin living in the presence of God. Above all other prayers, pray the Rosary. Our Lady herself revealed at Fatima that this is the most powerful of all devotions. Through it, countless souls have been rescued from sin and despair. The intercession of the Blessed Virgin is the strongest shield in heaven and on earth. And every night, before you go to sleep, make a daily examination of conscience. Look honestly at your day, your thoughts, your words, your actions. Ask forgiveness where you have fallen, and give thanks where you have loved. Go to confession often. Receive the Holy Eucharist frequently, as St. Pius X taught, because grace grows in the soul that hungers for it. What you have just heard in the letter from beyond isn't an isolated story. It echoes the same truth proclaimed for centuries, a truth defended with fire and tears by the saints and the Church itself. One of the clearest voices on this was Monsignor Louis Gaston de Ségur, author of the 19th century book, The Hell, What It Is, and How We Can Avoid It. This book was personally praised by Pope Pius IX, who called it a work that penetrates hearts and brings souls back to the path of salvation. In that book, Monsignor de Ségur reminds us that the greatest tragedy of our time is not that people sin, but that people no longer believe in sin at all. He says, "Those who laugh at hell are often the ones who fear it most." And it's true. Deep inside, the conscience of every person still knows that eternity is real, Monsignor de Ségur explains that the essence of hell is not fire, it's separation from God, to be cut off from the one who is love itself. That is the true torment. And yet, the fire remains a symbol of the soul's inner truth, a conscience burning forever in the knowledge that it chose darkness over light. He warns us that the road to damnation is not sudden. It's slow, comfortable, paved with small excuses and forgotten prayers. He writes, "The path to hell is wide and easy. It descends gently, and all one has to do is keep walking." But the same book offers hope. De Ségur says that every soul that thinks of hell sincerely will begin to turn toward heaven, because fear, when enlightened by truth, is the first grace of conversion. And so, the saints tell us to meditate on eternity, not to terrify ourselves, but to wake up, to realize that every choice, every thought, every word has an eternal weight. If we want to be saved, Monsignor de Ségur gives us a rule of life. Simple, but powerful. Live in a state of grace. Go to confession frequently. Examine your conscience every night before sleep. Begin and end every day with prayer. Stay close to the Eucharist, as St. Pius X taught, because grace grows in the soul that hungers for it. And entrust your life to the Blessed Virgin Mary through the daily rosary. Because, as he says, the intercession of Our Lady is the strongest shield in heaven and on earth. He concludes his book with these words, "Think often and seriously about hell, and you will go to heaven. The great missionary of heaven is hell." So remember, God does not want us to fear him. He wants us to awaken. The purpose of fear is not despair, but repentance. And repentance is the doorway to peace. If you watched until now, maybe it's because something inside you knows this is true. Don't waste that grace. Start today. Even with one prayer, one act of faith, one confession. Because, as Monsignor de Ségur writes, heaven begins the moment the soul turns back to God. If this story touched you, share it and subscribe to the Stigmata channel. Not for numbers, but because the world needs to remember that eternity is real and mercy is waiting.